Hi, I'm going to show how it's possible to use Flying Logic Pro to come to complicated decisions based off of many premises. The particular decision that I'm going to explore with this model is whether to buy a Retina 15-inch MacBook Pro for myself to replace my existing non-Retina 15-inch MacBook Pro. I have a contention up here that the new solid-state drive Retina 15-inch MacBook Pro is the best fit for me. You can see that it is set to false. Well, the reason for that, and this used to be true, but is not true any longer. We're going to correct it now. But it used to be true that it did not support FireWire. So let's look at this FireWire group real quick. I'm going to hoist this group, and we can see that there is a contention that I cannot get any of the newest generation of Apple laptops because of FireWire. This is because I require FireWire because of my audio device, and the newest generation of Apple laptops does not support FireWire. The reason I require FireWire because of my audio device is because I need to have an 8 XLR audio device, and they don't exist for Thunderbolt yet. Now, as we know, this is no longer true. Apple does sell a FireWire to Thunderbolt adapter. So how can we correct this graph? Well, the way we're going to do it is we're going to add an entity, and I'm going to label this as Apple sells a FireWire to Thunderbolt adapter. And I'm going to set it to true. Alright, now what's the problem here? The problem is that if this is true, we want this to be false. So how do we correct that? Well, we do this by looking at the edge, this arrow right here. If we control click on it, we can see that it's possible to change it from its default value of a positive weighting to a negative weighting. See how it turns red? It flipped the bit. So this means that if this is true, then this is false. And since both of these entities need to be true in order for this to be true, this also becomes false. So you can see that with the introduction of the FireWire to Thunderbolt adapter, it is now no longer true that I can't get the newest generation of Apple laptops because of FireWire. So let's go back to the main graph here. I'm going to close this group since we don't need to look at it anymore. And you can see that up top here, this is no longer set to false. It is now unknown. This means because FireWire is not a blocking factor anymore, it simply depends on all of these other unknowns that we have. So let's take a quick look at the rest of the graph. I have limited this to options of the MacBook Air or the Retina 13-inch. And the reason that I've limited it to those options is because I've ruled out these other options. I'm saying that my existing 15-inch MacBook Pro is limiting me too much because it takes too long to launch the software. I'm saying that the 17-inch is too heavy for me and out of date. And I'm saying that the Air and the MacBook Pros are the only other possible options. And that's because I want Apple, I want to be portable, and iPads aren't powerful enough for my needs. I've also said that it's worth about the $2,000 that I'm estimating it'll cost to sell my existing MacBook and buy the new one. So, with that justified, the rest of it comes down to various technical specifications of the different hardware options. I am currently making the contention that the 15-inch Retina is the best option, whereas the 13-inch Retina and the MacBook Airs are not the best option, but as we'll see, this might not necessarily be true. The first thing that I'm basing this off of is whether I need the CPU power that is similar to what my 15-inch can do. Now it just so happens that these days, my current 15-inch and the Retina displays, they're all around the same Geekbench scores, whereas the MacBook Air has a benchmark of about 2/3 of that. So you'll see if I set this to true, it's going to immediately rule out the MacBook Air as an option. Whereas if I set this to false, nothing happens. Things are still unknown. The other possibility is, what if I need 750 gigs of storage? Well, it's the same kind of thing. The Retinas offer that as an option. The MacBook Air does not. So if this is true, it's again going to rule out the MacBook Air. If it's false, then it's still open for debate. Finally, for the simpler ones, let's look at how much RAM I need. Well, it turns out the 15-inch Retina is the only one that offers 16 gigs of RAM. If I decide I need that, then you'll see that both the Retina 13-inch and the MacBook Air will be ruled out. Let's set it to true. So you can see that even though these are ruled out, it's still not necessarily true that this is the best option, because it does depend on one other thing, and that's whether the Retina has suitable graphical performance for me. Let's set this back to unknown, or even if we set it to false, we can see that all of the other ones are still options. So graphical performance is interesting with the Retina, because all of the Retina displays have a recommended default resolution. It just so happens that the recommended default resolution of the 15-inch Retina is less than my current resolution for my MacBook. My 15-inch MacBook has 1680 by 1050. If I decide that I require that, then that would be the same as saying that I want 1680. By definition, I would want at least this, and I wouldn't necessarily need 1920 by 1200. But you can see that that alone would be enough to rule out the MacBook Air. Whereas if I decided that really all I needed was the 1440 by 900, and I felt like that resolution didn't make the graphic elements too small on the 13-inch, then all of a sudden you could see that, oh, actually I changed this around. This is if this is saying that it's too small, that would actually rule out the Retina 13-inch. Whereas if I set that to say that it's not too small, if 1440 by 900 is not too small, then all of a sudden it turns out that both the Retina 13-inch and the MacBook Air are options for me. For the MacBook Air, this would be the 13-inch MacBook Air. However, if I did say that the 1680 by 1050 is a requirement, it rules out the Air, this is still unknown, because then it has to do with scaling. So even though there's a default resolution, on the Retinas you can scale things up to a much better resolution. However, for me, it's currently unclear whether this scaling upgrade would introduce performance degradation that would make working with the machine annoying. So if I set these to true, meaning that there's no problem, all three of these to true, then all of a sudden it becomes clear that the Retina 13-inch actually might be an option for me, and the 15-inch is not necessarily the best option for me. On the other hand, I'm still leaning towards 16 gigs of RAM and 750 gigs of storage. So you can see that I'm actually probably leaning towards the solid-state Retina 15-inch being the best fit for me. So this is a model of how to make decisions. I think this has two clear advantages for me. One is that if we're making complicated decisions and they're based off of a bunch of different premises, using a modeling program like this will help us to test our own assumptions and help us to check our premises. And they're also useful for justifying to someone else in your household that might have an influence on your decision. But the other thing about this is that when we make complicated decisions that stick with us for a while, we might want to come back and look at them later, because we might remember that we made this decision, and it could be anything from what kind of utility companies to use, what kind of insurance to buy, all sorts of complicated things like that. But we might forget all of the premises underneath. So if we have saved this into a model like this, we can come back, check our premises, and if any of the premises have changed in the meantime, then it might imply that we could actually make a different decision in the future. Okay, thank you.